don't know. We don't know what's going on. Um, we need to get a deal done and stop with all this foolishness. Stop with all this 3-on-3 and all of this other stuff, man. Get a deal done so that we can start the real games, okay? People are getting hurt left and right. It was a lot of injuries.
We don't know, and until we know, everything else is projection layered on top of anxiety. But anxiety doesn't appear out of nowhere. It builds, it compounds, it feeds on timing. And the timing of this situation is what makes it feel so heavy. Let's zoom out for a second. The WNBA is not operating in a calm, stable environment right now. The league is negotiating a new collective bargaining agreement. Owners and players are staring at each other across the table. There's a March 10 pressure point hanging in the air. The word lockout has been whispered enough times that it no longer sounds dramatic. It sounds possible. And in the middle of that storm, one of the foundational young stars of the Indiana Fever goes down. It's not just an injury. It's instability stacked on instability. Because this particular duo, Caitlin Clark and Aaliyah Boston, isn't just another backcourt-frontcourt pairing. It represents the next era, the economic engine, the ratings spike, the merchandising wave, the national TV flex scheduling. Clark brings gravity. Boston brings balance. Clark stretches the defense horizontally. Boston controls it vertically. When Clark crosses half court, defenders extend past the three-point line. When Boston seals inside, help defenders collapse toward the paint. That push-pull dynamic is what turns a good offense into a top-tier one. Now, imagine that balance disrupted before the season even begins. That's why fans are uneasy. Not because injuries are rare, they're not. Basketball is a collision sport disguised as finesse. Ankles roll, knees buckle, hamstrings tighten. That's part of the game. The unease comes from the lack of clarity. Right lower extremity injury is broad. It's medical shorthand. It protects privacy. It avoids premature diagnosis. But it also leaves a vacuum, and vacuums get filled with worst-case scenarios. Social media doesn't do patience well. It does amplification. A vague update becomes a torn Achilles in a matter of hours. A ruled-out status becomes season-ending speculation. The absence of...
All right, now, courtesy of Chloe Peterson here, she said Aaliyah Boston, who left Phantom BC's last regular season game with injury, has been ruled out for the rest of the season due to a right lower extremity injury. That is very vague. That could be that could be a sore calf. That could be an Achilles. That could be an ankle, a foot. We don't know what's going on. It could be a knee. We don't know what lower extremity. What? That's very vague. That's very, very vague.
Information becomes interpreted as intentional concealment. That's how panic spreads. But let's ground this. We have no confirmation of catastrophic damage. None. No surgical reports, no official timeline, no verified source saying ACL or Achilles. Until that exists, responsible analysis stays within what's known. She's out for the remainder of that specific league season. And here's where context matters. The 3-on-3 league, backed by players like Breanna Stewart and Nafisa Collier, was positioned as an alternative to overseas play. For years, WNBA players went to Russia, Turkey, China, and elsewhere during the off-season to earn higher salaries. That meant year-round competition, heavy travel, and minimal recovery. The new model aimed to reduce that load. Shorter schedule, domestic travel, player equity, controlled environment. From a labor perspective, that's empowerment.
Boston produced 19 points per game for her Phantom BC squad this year, which was the second most among centers and unrivaled in the fact that Boston averaged over one made three-pointer per game and shoots 33% from behind the arc shows her game is continuing to grow and develop, which should bode well for the Fever. Listen, if she's going to be shooting and making threes when she's doing that pick and pop, pick and roll with Caitlin Clark, when Caitlin Clark is getting blitzed.
From a basketball perspective, it still involves cutting, pivoting, sprinting, and landing. No environment eliminates risk entirely. And that's the uncomfortable truth. Whether it's a EuroLeague game in Istanbul or a 3-on-3 matchup in Miami, an athlete's ligaments don't differentiate between branding. Now let's talk about basketball consequences without sensationalism. Last season, defenses aggressively trapped Clark. They forced her into high, difficult reads. She still produced, but it required stamina, composure, and resilience against physical contact. Boston's development trajectory matters because it alters defensive math. If Boston stretches to 15 to 18 feet consistently, that's one layer. If she reliably hits from beyond the arc at league average efficiency, that's another level. It punishes help defenders, it widens driving lanes, it creates cleaner passing angles. Even incremental improvement shifts playoff probability. So yes, any interruption to her preparation matters, but preparation and absence are not the same as derailment. We've seen athletes return from early off-season injuries and perform at elite levels. We've seen minor injuries exaggerated.
FIBA tournament. Okay, here it says, therefore, it's still unknown how serious the cause of the injury is, but the fact that she won't play in Phantom BC's unrivaled playoff games isn't ideal. It will be interesting to see what Boston's status is for the upcoming FIBA World Cup qualifying tournament, which begins on March 11th and runs through March 17th in Puerto Rico. Boston, along with Caitlin Clark, is on Team USA's roster, but this injury makes it uncertain whether Boston will be able to compete. Fans will need to keep an eye on any further
by rumor cycles. We've seen organizations deliberately limit information early because diagnostics take time. Patience is not denial, it's discipline. The international dimension adds another layer. USA basketball events are about chemistry and evaluation. Missing camp reps isn't ideal, but Olympic cycles are long. World Cup qualifiers aren't the final stage. Athletes have missed early camps and still played critical roles later. Again, uncertainty does not automatically equal catastrophe. Now let's address the emotional undercurrent driving so much of the reaction: exhaustion. Fans feel like they've been in non-stop drama mode. CBA headlines, revenue debates, ownership ultimatums, player union tensions, the narrative of momentum versus mismanagement, the sense that this is a pivotal year for the league's financial trajectory. And then, boom, injury headline. It feels like a tipping point because people are already on edge. But here's the deeper macro reality. The WNBA's growth curve is larger than one injury. Yes, Clark's arrival accelerated viewership. Yes, Boston is central to Indiana's rebuild. Yes, timing matters. But sustainable leagues don't hinge on a single ligament. They hinge on systems, revenue-sharing models, broadcast contracts, grassroots development, collective bargaining stability, roster depth, medical infrastructure. If the league wants to convert its current visibility into long-term stability, the labor peace resolution is exponentially more important than any one February injury, because labor peace creates predictability. Predictability attracts sponsors. Sponsors stabilize revenue. Revenue strengthens salaries.
Stronger salaries reduce off-season strain. That's the structural loop. Right now, the emotional spotlight is on Boston's leg. But strategically, the league's future still depends on the negotiation table more than the medical tent. That doesn't minimize the personal impact. For Boston, this is about her body, her preparation, her rhythm, her conditioning cycle. Athletes build toward seasons with precision. Every week matters. For Clark, it's about continuity, reps with her primary frontcourt partner, trust in timing, understanding how defenses adjust. For the Fever organization, it's about contingency planning, depth chart adjustments, rotation experiments, managing expectations. But here's the part that often gets lost in heated discourse. Professional sports teams plan for injuries. They don't assume perfection. They build depth. They cross-train lineups. They simulate alternative rotations. The question isn't, will Indiana collapse? It's, how adaptable are they? Adaptability separates contenders from fragile narratives. And let's be honest, sometimes adversity accelerates growth. If Boston misses early time, Clark may be forced to diversify her reads. Secondary scorers may step into expanded roles. Bench players may gain confidence. Coaches may experiment with spacing schemes they wouldn't otherwise test. Short-term disruption can create long-term versatility. Again, that's not minimizing the loss, it's recognizing complexity. The darkest timeline only becomes real if multiple variables fail simultaneously. Severe injury with extended absence, CBA breakdown leading to lockout, chemistry disruption without adjustment, momentum loss in national spotlight. That's a stack of worst-case scenarios. Possible? Technically. Probable? Not necessarily. And responsible analysis doesn't leap to apocalypse because the phrase lower extremity sounds ominous. It waits. It gathers facts. It separates fear from evidence. Right now, evidence is limited. Boston is out for the remainder of that specific league season. We await clarity on diagnosis. The CBA deadline approaches. That's the real picture. The temptation to frame this as a crime against basketball or the destruction of a generational era may generate clicks, but it doesn't generate truth. Sports history is filled with setbacks that felt catastrophic in the moment and faded into footnotes later. It's also filled with cautionary tales where early warning signs were ignored. The difference between those two paths is transparency and smart management. If the medical staff provides a clear update soon, panic cools. If the CBA gets resolved before March 10th, momentum stabilizes. If Boston's injury proves moderate rather than severe, the narrative flips overnight from doom to resilience. This is the volatility of modern sports media. High stakes, instant amplification, minimal patience. But here's what remains steady. The Fevers still have a franchise guard in Clark. The league still has record-level attention. The owners and union still have incentive to strike a deal. The season has not started yet. Nothing is decided in February. Nothing is won or lost in speculation. And perhaps the most important point of all, athletes are not assets in a spreadsheet drama. They are human beings navigating physical risk at elite speed. Boston's priority isn't headlines, it's recovery, diagnosis, rehabilitation. Clark's priority isn't narrative control, it's preparation. The league's priority should be clarity and stability. If those three things align, this moment becomes a speed bump rather than a cliff. But until then, we wait. We resist turning vague medical phrasing into confirmed disaster. We acknowledge the tension without manufacturing catastrophe. We recognize that momentum doesn't disappear because of one injury report, and we remember why this matters in the first place. Not because of boardroom battles, not because of viral debates, but because when the ball tips off and the crowd rises and the spacing snaps into place, that's when the noise fades. That's when basketball reclaims the narrative. Right now, the story feels uncertain. The clock is ticking toward March 10th. Negotiations loom. Updates are pending. But uncertainty is not the same thing as collapse. It's simply the uncomfortable space between incident and information. And until real information arrives, discipline, not drama, is the only responsible response. The timeline isn't dark yet. It's just unclear. And those are two very different things. Then let's push the conversation somewhere deeper, somewhere less emotional and more strategic, because if we keep circling the same panic points, we miss the real structural tension underneath all of this. What's really being tested right now isn't just a knee, an ankle, or a calf. It's governance. It's ecosystem design. It's whether a rapidly growing professional league can handle simultaneous pressure from labor negotiations, media expectations, and the physical realities of elite athletes. Because here's the uncomfortable truth nobody wants to say out loud. The WNBA is in a transition phase that's bigger than any individual player. For years, the league fought for visibility, it fought for relevance, it fought for broadcast windows that weren't buried on secondary channels, it fought for investment. Now it has momentum, and momentum changes the stakes. When a league is small and struggling, injuries are unfortunate. When a league is expanding and under a microscope, injuries become symbolic. They become narratives about infrastructure.
About medical transparency. About scheduling philosophy. That's the shift happening right now. The arrival of a market-moving rookie like Caitlin Clark didn't just add scoring, it added scrutiny. It added casual viewers who aren't steeped in the league's culture. It added analysts who previously ignored women's basketball but now dissect every detail. That means every setback feels amplified, but amplification doesn't always equal magnitude. Let's talk about the physical calendar of a modern professional basketball player. The traditional cycle used to look like this: college season, short break, WNBA season, immediate overseas contract, repeat. Minimal recovery windows, constant load on joints, constant adaptation to different systems and teammates. The new alternative leagues, including the player-driven 3-on-3 concept, were meant to reimagine that cycle. Fewer games, shorter seasons, higher pay per appearance, less transcontinental travel. But there's a design question buried inside that idea. Does condensed intensity create its own risk? 3-on-3 basketball is not the same as 5-on-5. It's more space, more isolation, more repeated one-on-one drives, fewer built-in rest moments within possessions. Defensive rotations are shorter but more frequent. Offensive actions reset faster. In some ways, that means less cumulative mileage. In other ways, it means sharper bursts of strain. The biomechanics are different, and the sports science community hasn't yet produced long-term, large-sample data on how elite WNBA-level athletes respond to that specific format across multiple years. That's not a condemnation. It's a reality of innovation. When leagues experiment with format, they experiment with physiology. Now layer that into collective bargaining negotiations, because here's what labor discussions often revolve around: revenue share percentages, salary cap structures, free agency rules, marketing commitments. But beneath those financial arguments is a more foundational question. How do you design a sustainable career arc for athletes whose earning window is limited and whose physical risk is constant? If players feel underpaid relative to league revenue growth, they seek additional platforms. If owners feel financial pressure, they negotiate cautiously. If alternative leagues promise empowerment, players diversify their income streams. That diversification, however, complicates load management oversight. Who tracks minutes across leagues? Who sets medical protocols? Who determines return-to-play standards when a player competes in multiple environments with different administrative leadership? Those aren't emotional questions, they're structural ones. Right now, the basketball conversation is centered on one injury update, but the governance conversation is about shared responsibility. Because if a player is under contract in one league and competes in another during the offseason, accountability becomes layered. Not adversarial, layered. And layered systems require communication channels that are airtight. That's the part fans don't see. Behind the scenes, front offices often maintain regular contact with players' off-season trainers. Strength coaches exchange data, load metrics are tracked, recovery protocols are aligned. But when a player participates in a league that isn't formally integrated into the primary league's operational framework, coordination becomes more complex. Not impossible, just more complex. And complexity under public pressure feels fragile. Now let's pivot to the psychological dimension. Athletes at the top tier operate in a constant tension between risk and legacy. Every game carries exposure. Sit out too often, and narratives question durability. Play through pain, and you risk long-term damage. That balance becomes even more delicate when the league itself is negotiating financial terms, because athletes know their peak years are limited. They know endorsement windows don't stay open forever. They know marketability is tied to visibility. So when new platforms offer additional spotlight and compensation, the decision calculus isn't simple. It's not greed. It's not recklessness. It's career management under uncertainty. And that uncertainty is amplified when collective bargaining isn't settled. Because without a finalized agreement, players don't have full clarity on future revenue projections, salary escalators, or expanded benefits. So they hedge, they diversify, they create leverage. But leverage comes with exposure. Exposure comes with physical